Okay, so you can see here that the model has been black primed and then given a very light sanding with wet Trizact. No video of that, but it's just a very light, very wet sanding and then dried off. It's been left for a couple of days because I've been doing other things. And so we're using a light sort of olive grey. I think the colour I'm using is Mr. Colour 128. There's some sort of prevarication, if you like, in the instructions, so I settled on this as being sort of in the ballpark of what I would be happy to use. So initially it's doing a few of the little parts here, undercarriage doors and stuff, drop tanks, and you can see I'm just kind of squiggling it on to start with, and then I'll go back over it. I'm very much one who generally tends to start off with opaque coats of paint and then weathers on top of that, rather than the people who apply a dark base coat and then use black basing or whatever you want to call it. I'm not saying it's not a valid method, it's just one that I don't use because I don't like the results I get with it. Other people do, more power to them. But for me, it's about getting a really good opaque coat of the base colours on first. So multiple coats coming in at various different angles on this. It's important, as much as it's important to get an opaque coat, it's also important to cover as many of the angles as you possibly can, to ensure full coverage of the parts you're painting. And then we'll do the drop tanks. Same thing applies here. So yeah, this paint is probably thinned like 80%, and the pressure is no higher than about 10 to 12 psi for this. It's very low pressure, very thin paint. Trying to avoid any sort of vortexes or anything, or spraying into blind corners and stuff, which can create those air patterns which dry paint out and lead to quite rough paint finishes. In fact, it can be quite sandy if you're not careful. So it's always trying to keep the pressure down as low as possible, but still get good atomization, depending on the kind of area you're trying to cover. This is a small model, small areas, so low pressure is still going to allow me to get good coverage quite quickly. And then onto the main model, and again you can see me angling the airbrush there towards the rear, so I'm not actually spraying into any sharp corners or anything, so hopefully giving any air an escape route, which means it doesn't set up vortexes and stuff in those corners, and create that kind of grainy, gritty finish that you can sometimes get. But you can see how lightly the paint is going on. Initially it just kind of builds up quite quickly because Mr. Colour and other lacquers like it are quite dense. So what I'll do in a second is I'll switch to I'll speed the video up to 2 times, and you can watch me spraying it in a you know, it took a very few minutes to get a good opaque coat even over this black primer. Again, you can see me going at it from as many angles as I possibly can, especially with things like the wheelbays. Wheelbays are particularly prone to getting gritty finishes in them, so just be very, very careful. But you can see, you know, like I said, I appreciate this is at double time, but even so, you can see how relatively quickly you are able to build lacquer paints on top of almost any primer finish. So what I've done here is I'm just going back and I'm just adding even more thinner to the paint, and that's thinning it back to probably around 90%, I would think, and then we're ready to apply a couple of coats. And you can see how over the initial base coat of the finished colour, more coats just really ramp up the opacity really quickly. Like I say, this is probably 90% thinner, this coat, but you can see how the opacity comes in very quickly if you let the undercoat flash off first. So it builds really rapidly on top, but it's still very thin indeed. So if you think 90% of this is thinner, and of the original paint, probably well over 50% of the original paint is just the binder and carrier. So there's less than, you know, only a couple of percent of what you're seeing here is the actual paint and pigment going on. So the vast majority of what you apply here is going to flash off, which means that you know, all your fine detail, like the rivets I've put on this, things like that, are going to, you know, largely remain and be there for weathering and washes and stuff. A couple of minor details I forgot, like the tail wheel doors and the cowling gills need a bit of painting doing as well. So just while I'm here, while the paint cup's full, just picking up the instructions there to check where the division line is for the cowlings and for the cowling gills, and which cowling gill goes on which side, so I could work out which part of it needs painting the light grey. I'm not painting the inside of these because they're going to be basically closed and covered by exhaust parts. And just giving it a quick check and a very light mist again over everything here, just to ensure a good even coverage. And that's it. So again, the joy of these lacquer paints like Mr. Colour is that you can pour what remains back into the cup. It won't spoil the paint like it used to do with enamels. And that's it. So I'll catch you when we're ready to do the top sides.